Welcome to the Deer Society podcast. Here's your host, Brian Lemke.
Yeah, this is who I am. Well, I'm a deer hunting man.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deer Society podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Brian Lemke, joined today by Brian Clary, Mike Ducart, and JJ Ducart. Again, exciting time of year. We're here late September, early October, and things are changing. We actually had first frost of the year this morning. Some of us have been out hunting. Some of us have not been out hunting yet, waiting for some bucks to shift and show up. But we're going to break down a few hunts recently here in this podcast. And we're also going to open it up and talk about kind of a Q&A session. So we posted on the social media channels, if you watch us on social, on Deer Society, asked you guys for some questions and some topics that we should talk about in the podcast room today, and got a lot of good feedback there. We're going to continue to do that Q&A a little more. So definitely keep an eye out on Deer Society social, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and submit those comments, questions, and topics that you want to hear us talk about. So we're going to be doing a little bit of everything today. But let's kick it off. How's everybody been doing? Anybody been out hunting yet? What's going on?
No stand sits yet for me.
0 for Mike.
0 for me.
Well, I guess I'm the only one that's been out in the tree then. So I have hunted twice now, and just hunted based on intel. And we were talking about that before the podcast and why we have or haven't been hunting. And before I talk about why I've been hunting, Mike, you were just talking about it. You haven't sat in the tree yet.
I have not sat in the stand yet, and it's kind of weird that you bring that up now, because the last few days I've run into some friends of mine and they're asking me, and says, well, hey, you know, how many bucks you seen? You seen anything nice? How many sits you sitting in and that kind of thing? And I look at them like, well, I haven't been out yet. And they kind of look at me with a blank stare. And I says, usually we typically wait until we start getting intel on the bigger bucks. And then once they show up, then that's when we start our strategy. We like to pattern them and kind of get a strategy going and go that way. So to watch their faces like, wow, you haven't been out, and then watch them process that, and they kind of come to this, moment. It's like, well, maybe I should be doing something like that, or maybe I'm doing something wrong, or it doesn't make sense to go out there and bump my stands up and stuff. So that's the reason I haven't been out, and it's just because of that's my hunting strategy.
See, I'm on a little bit of the other end of the spectrum. I've had some really good activity on my reveals here in the last week or so. A lot of bucks showing up, and a lot of bucks showing up in the daylight. I still have green beans on the farm that I'm hunting. So, it's one of those, my strategy is take advantage of those green soybeans while they're still there, because they're going to shift. Now, with that frost this morning, some wind and some colder weather that we've had, just in 2 days, those beans have really turned or started to turn yellow. But I have had a couple sits. Last night, I had a great sit. Saw a ton of deer, saw a mature buck, 9-pointer that actually I don't have any reveal pictures or videos of. So that was kind of a cool surprise. It was kind of a situation. I was sitting over this green bean field and had some does come out, had a 2-year-old buck come out, 3-year-old buck. They kind of started sparring a little bit, and 2 minutes after that appears this bigger buck, and laid binoculars on him. And I'm like, man, that's a buck that I don't know. And he came out, and, he's a mature deer. So whether he was 4, whether he was 5, he had a kind of an older face, sway back, kind of hanging belly, good mass, big brows, a deer that I would have shot. But he came out there, and it was like, this is my turf, what's going on? Those 2 bucks are kind of sparring. He got right in there, and they actually got pretty aggressive. This time of year, you don't expect to see a real hardcore fight go at it. But I'm going to tell you, we got some pretty cool video, because these bucks were going at it. Like, he was out there and he was showing them who was boss and what was up. So they were about 100 yards out there, kind of worked their way to 80, just messing around with each other, started to work off the other direction. So I actually took the black rack and put it behind my back and just a little soft tickle. And that deer turned and he looked my direction. The hard thing about the spot that I was in was it's a pretty open field. So the disadvantage that I had was he could kind of see all the way to me. I was in a position where he couldn't see me and I had the black rack concealed behind my back, but he could kind of see what was going on. So that tickle got his attention. He put his head back down, started to feed again. I gave him another tickle, looked up again, and, was kind of interested, but again, he could see that there was no deer where that was coming from. Now, they could have been in the woods, but it's pretty thick where I was in the woods. And he went back to feeding, and at that point I quit. So I was going to go far enough to get his attention, and with it being early like that, I didn't want to make too much racket or tip him off too much. I figured it was worth a shot and definitely piqued his interest. But again, the disadvantage that I was at was he could see pretty much all the way to me. So, he didn't see those deer. He was content feeding there at that point, worked off the other direction. But definitely an awesome sit. Really cool to start seeing that action, mature buck on his feet, daylight hours, those cool temperatures, seeing that interaction between a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 4 or 5-year-old, that's what we're going to start to see here. Bucks are breaking up. JJ, I know you guys have had some bucks together on your reveals, and I think that's going to start to shift here. Mike, you were talking about the time of year, so dive into that with first frost this morning.
I wanted to kind of comment on pretty much your story there, and JJ and I can confirm this together because these are things that we've experienced together through the years. And, everybody asks, well, what should I do now? What should I do here? What should I do there? Well, there's no real answer for that. But the best way to become a good hunter and a good strategist is learn from the past. And so that comment is going to move forward based off of your story. Consistently, since we've been studying deer, and JJ will confirm this, we've sat in the tree together and we've had that exact same scenario or something similar to what you experienced yesterday under the same time of year and the same element. Okay. And so your story was so familiar with multiple stories that we've experienced. And I don't know that I want to go into each one independently, but basically the first frost, the first week in October, now this is southeast Minnesota, the first frost, the first week in October, and of course, back then we didn't even know about the red moon, but the red moon is going to be syncing up as well during this exact same time. So literally last night, I texted JJ out of the blue. We weren't even talking about anything. I said, hey, the elements are coming together. And I checked the cameras, and there's all kinds of bucks showing up, not big ones, but, the regulars. I said, these big guys are going to start showing up. We got frost tomorrow. We have first week in October, and then we have a red moon coming. And then JJ's like, maybe I should go sit for, some shooters that he has on camera in Wisconsin. Maybe I should go sit for a daylight with them. And, I thought that was a good idea. But back to your story, the two biggest, well, maybe three, but the two largest deer that JJ and I have ever seen since we've been hunting in real time, real life, in a stand, were this exact window. And one was that 200-incher. Remember, we were in the corner, and he came out and did a lot of what Brian was talking about. Now, this is a 200-inch deer. This guy was ridiculous. It'd be cool if we could pull up some of that old footage of that. We had an old Sony cam, and we didn't know what we were doing, and, we'd play with the iris and the, shutter speed for light. And it's kind of the beginning of our filming days. But this deer shows up out in the middle of this open field, making his presence known. And that's what they do this time of year, these big deer. They come out and they say, hey, I'm here now. And it can be anything from running off other bucks because they're being around does, or going into a herd of does who are still kind of together now, and, puffing their chests. And I think he did one of them big, like, roar kind of things out in the middle of this open field. And you could just see it. We didn't get the audio, but you could see his mouth open up and just kind of, roar, And there was little satellite bucks running around, and he was getting a little ticked off at them. We tried a little bit of calling. We tried a little bit of rattling, got his interest, but, you're not going to, it didn't work. He didn't come in. Another time, there was a 192-inch deer. Now, the reason we know how big these deer are is because somebody else got them. But there was a 192, And his first appearance was it was a morning sit on a weekend, first week in October, after the first frost. And then I always noticed the robins start to migrate. And I saw robins in my tree yesterday too. And that's why I thought, hey, that's this time of year. So we were sitting there and it was a frosty morning, beautiful, quiet, calm, and nothing was really going on. And about 9 o'clock? I thought I heard a little bit of rustling and I kind of looked back. I'm the camera guy, JJ's the shooter. Didn't think too much of it. And all of a sudden, well, you could probably tell the story better than me because you were the hunter, but this big 192 shows up right below the stand. First time we had ever seen him. And those are the only 2 daylights we ever got of those deer. JJ actually had a chance at that 192 from a ground blind right at camera. Back then it was the tapes. Yeah, the digital tapes. And so the camera inside the blind, all this stuff, ran out of light, but it was still shooting hours. And he just was young and was, freaked out and no camera and decided not to shoot it. And I'm just like, wow. Because we're talking, 17 yards or something?
Yeah, and he was quartering to a little bit. And
oh,
it was,
okay. Didn't feel
a lot
right.
of stuff. But yeah. It's that time of the year where their big boys are starting to move, and I was just going to go back to Brian's stories a little bit from last night. I think your rattling tactic was pretty good. I know that double split, I kind of pulled that off on him early October, and we're basically, about to October now. So that behind the back rattling, that's a pretty slick tactic. I'm surprised it didn't work. Maybe if you gave it a couple more, or if you had a little bit more cover, I think, might have pulled him in there. But then also when you texted me last night, like new buck showed up, and I said unsolved mystery, which was the hunt we did 2 years ago. Well, then I looked back, that was October 2nd. When I shot that buck that just appeared out of nowhere, on a nice cold, probably red moon, kind of all the elements came together. So yeah, it's that time of the year where new bucks could show up pretty much any time. And these cold fronts, first frost this morning, frost on the plots. We had that buck we call Goofy now, 6-year-old, was in front of the camera, perfect daylight, 7:30. So they're out moving. Big bucks are actually moving, checking scrapes. We had a new 4-year-old, not a new 4-year-old, but a 4-year-old show up for the first time in Hardhorn this morning at the Whitetails from Scratch property. So just new bucks are popping up. You had a pretty good hunt last night and should be getting good.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. I look at it and I had some other 2 target bucks that have been on the reveal there that I was looking for, bucks that we have a lot of history with. And it was cool because I actually said it on a podcast here a few ago that, it's rare that I go out to that particular farm and I'm surprised by a deer that I see that I don't have a reveal picture of. And sure enough, on the first sits of the year, boom, there's a brand new buck. And that's cool. It kind of, it grounds me and it grounds you, I think, as, everybody talks about, cell cameras and the reliance on them and intel and whatever else. And it grounds you and it brings you back. And you have to realize that, yeah, they give you great intel, but it's not like you being out there and hunting and the variables that happen and new deer showing up. And it was cool. It was exciting for me to see that deer. And, hunting, it's all hindsight when you look back at it, did you do the right thing? And you talk about, if I had given him a little more, would he have came? Maybe, and maybe not, but my mindset in that situation was, and there was some other deer around, like down in the corner, some does down there. So again, with it being early, I'm almost trying to mimic what that 2 and 3-year-old were doing, before that deer came out. Like they weren't going crazy, just a little tickling. And I knew I'm reading that deer's body language, right? He's looking, I'm getting his attention, but he's there to feed. Getting his attention again, but then I can see he's there to feed. So, could I have given him a little more? Maybe, but I just felt in that circumstance, like, again, we're early. And it goes back to what you're saying, Mike, too. Like, you don't want to put too much pressure on these deer. And I just didn't want to overdo it. So, it's hindsight.
I got a little comment on that, actually, because that's another question we get a lot of is, well, what should I do this time of the year? What should I do? And you can't say, well, you should do this, you should do that. You have to go by experience and what you have experienced. And so here's the deal. JJ did that little rattling sequence and it worked for him. And I think the difference between his scenario and your scenario would have been that JJ had a room that this buck wanted to defend, and he couldn't see who was in that room.
Yeah, I had that year. We had the plot screen up around.
Yeah,
the
the
plot,
screen,
which-
and that's the important. Those screens make a huge difference. So maybe that little bit there. But I guess to answer the question that I get, what do I do this time of year? What should I have done? Do exactly what Brian just told you to do. And you may not realize it, but what are the deer doing with that deer? What are the deer doing around you? That's what you do. That's the answer to that question. And that's how you learn, you know?
So exciting things coming up. We had a wind switch back out of the south. So, give it I'm personally going to give it a rest for a few days, wait for that wind to switch back to the north. But, we got good things lining up here. Red moon is coming end of this week, cooler temperatures, beginning of October. Great time to be in the woods. I know, JJ, you're going to hunt a little bit over there in Wisconsin. What's your strategy kind of this weekend?
Well, thinking about it, if you hadn't have told me it was a red moon weekend, I'd put less emphasis on it, but I'm debating now. So 50-50 shot at going after a buck over there. So we'll see. It's a real light wind. It's a southeast. It's like 2-3 miles an hour for a couple days in a row. Not ideal, like super calm. I don't like super calm days. But
Yeah.
does the red moon trump the barometric pressure and all the good stuff? I don't know.
Well,
Guess we'll see.
if you have a wind that's, that a rare wind that puts you in a good position, I might go for it, but then you remember that it swirls too when it's that light. So yeah, you just have to weigh it all out, I guess.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mike. So Mike's got this thing that every year he always jokes about somebody that's going to throw a phase wind floater on a deer's back. We're always trying to capture, deer downwind and support why phase works so well. And man, I got to tell you, I almost had it the other night. So this
Landed on his back.
This doe snuck in behind me, and it was early in the sit, and the wind was blowing at a pretty good clip, and she was running around, and she came downwind and came in the woods right by me, and I couldn't even, she got in there so quick I couldn't even turn the camera around to kind of move. So I just slipped my cell phone out of my pocket and I started filming, and the leaves are blowing right at her, and I pulled a wind floater out and I threw the first one, then went down just behind her, and then as I got the other one out, she took a step forward and I threw that wind floater and it went right to where she was standing. Like if she wouldn't have moved and stepped forward, that wind floater would have hit her right in the face.
Right in the back, in the face.
It was perfect. And then she walked 2 more steps and bedded down. So
I think we're going to put a bounty on that.
Yeah, we should. But it was obviously another just good testament of the phase system working. I mean, that deer was right there downwind. There's proof that she was downwind. Then she took 2 steps and bedded down. So that was cool to see. It's always comforting, when you have the first deer does come in and you beat them. Like that makes you confident that you have the potential to have a really good sit. Brian, what's your strategy coming up moving forward? When are you going to get out there?
I'm waiting. I am. If I do any sitting right now, it's going to be on my exterior stands where I can kind of see into the property a little bit more. We put in a new field a little over 2 weeks ago now. Got really good growth on that for the first 2 weeks with a minimal rain. So at least got a green field that's producing for the fall here. We're starting to see more and more deer activity every night on that field, and we've got a box blind out there that is seals up really nicely, so I can keep my scent out of there as much as possible. But more as an observation stand where I can see where the deer are traveling, where they're coming from, to give me an indication. 1, if I got my trail camera set up in the right spots, and 2, where the bucks will be coming from, because they're going to be using those transition trails pretty heavily where you're seeing these big groups of does and fawns coming out.
Right on.
And I think this frost is going to change the food.
Yes.
So I know we don't talk a lot about that, but I think apples get better. Obviously our brassicas and different things like that, which I'm not an expert on, but I do love apples.
Yeah, we were out this morning looking at the plots, and everything was pure frost, and we got some cool shots and looked at the heavy browse in some different spots, and even the weeds. I don't know if it's called like the silkweed or buttonweed or whatever we call it. Those were just wilted and dying instantly from this frost. So yeah, you can just tell it's affecting plants like right away.
Yeah, it was a good frost because I looked out the back window at 7:30 and the sun had been up a while, and there was still gray frost, and I'm up a little bit higher too. So, but what's that going to do to the food?
Well, the less mature plants, if you got in and planted, say, your brassicas 3-4 weeks ago, those are going to have a lot less chance of surviving these first initial frosts. The more established, where you got the biomass under the soil, good green foliage, those usually can do well. I mean, 28 degrees for 2-3 days straight, they're still going to stay green. But after that, then they're going to start to get that yellowing, really pushing those sugars out into the canopy.
Well, let's jump into some of these questions or topics that that some of you guys have sent in on social media. JJ, I know you got a list over there, so let's jump into a little Q&A session.
Yeah, I got one that probably makes sense to hit right away. Devin was asking us about food plots and some of the tactics we use to plant and stuff. We can get into that a little bit later on different podcasts. We'll be doing a bunch of videos on that, but he also wanted to know kind of what our favorite blends were that we were planting, the genetic green stuff out at the property. He must have watched Whitetails from scratch, so he had some questions about that. Favorite blends, brassicas versus clover. And then he also asked some switchgrass stuff, which I can kind of cover after. Maybe Claire, you jump into a couple different blends. I know we're testing a lot, so it's kind of a wide open deal.
I was going to say that because we're actually learning that, right? The answer to that question now, but some of it we've already figured out.
Yeah. And the way we're establishing these plots more now as a system, having the kind of key micronutrients for your early season feeding versus your late season carbohydrates, and getting that blend to come together in that equal balance where the deer are going to be able to sustain the browsing pressure throughout the property throughout the entire season. So like you were saying, we're doing a lot of testing on that this year. And I mean, we could cover this in an entire podcast episode of just this question alone. But really the favorite blends it really depends on the time of the year. When you're building that system, you want a little bit of each of the elements on the property. So there's not one thing I would recommend over another, depending on it depends on a lot. You got to take a step back outside of each individual property. What do you have around you for ag? What do you have for cover? What do you have for open fields, sunlight, southern facing hillsides for bedding, stuff like that. So you really got to approach each property individually. But if you're going for a favorite, I mean, for palatability, this time of the year right now, they're hitting those annual sugar rise really heavy. They're hitting the kales, especially like the southern kales, the southern variety of kales that kind of mature a little more rapidly. They're absolutely demolishing those right now.
They're picking them out.
Yeah, they pick them out of the brassica fields. They know what their palate feels what they want to eat.
Figure it out. Yeah. It's kind of surprising. So I'll comment a little bit on that from a different perspective. I'm not the specialist here as far as that goes, but consistently looking at what the deer feed and browse on, it's a combination of what's around you naturally. We have a lot of fruit. We have obviously acorns, a good significant bunch of acorns. We have ag. So those are things that we don't really do anything with. So we're going to supply them with something that complements that. And like Brian said, consistently what I've noticed, and I've been putting food plots in my backyard for 15, 20 years and studying deer behavior and what they do. And now the bat blind even lets me get more intel for Brian and JJ on these food plots because we put in different, like 4 or 5 or 6 sections of different vegetation. And I'm going to be able to watch what they're doing, when they're doing, and how they're doing it.
Yeah.
What they like, what they don't like, and you're comparing one common brassica to another, but they're different species, you'll know which one they prefer. Mm-hmm. So those are the types of things we're doing. But the rye right away went to my head. Yep. And the chicory all summer into the fall, they're going to be consistent with. And now with this first frost, we're going to learn what they really like in them other brassicas.
Yeah, and I mean, even just walking this morning, those foraged brassicas, more like that variety has just been getting hammered. And we did some video next to an exclusion cage we put in, a 3x3 just kind of fenced off a spot, and it was like double the size of the actual plot because the deer just been mowing that down. One thing I did notice this morning on camera was, or even last night, there's a plot we have with more like turnip stuff, more you know, they haven't been touching quite as much, but that cold weather and this frost came in, and also, you know, the deer showed up on that plot for the first time in a couple weeks, you know, a lot more heavy. So, you know, new bucks, that's where the new bucks were showing up. They were all out there, 3-4 bucks, you know, eating that. So I think things are starting to turn a little bit. And then I know we got that one variety down in front of the bat blind that hasn't been touched either. That's 3 feet tall.
Yeah, that's big.
So is that a fail, or is that ready to be, you know,
We'll find
the
out
next
throughout
key
the
element?
season. Yeah, I mean,
So
what Mike's going to really be able to do though is dial in what certain varieties they're hitting at what times of the year, when their palate's changing, what they're getting from. I mean, they're all producing different nutrients for, I mean, digestive system, circulatory system. The deer know what they want and what they need, and they're picking those out. And this is going to give us the indication of when they're doing it, what weather patterns they line up with it, whether it's the first frost, when it starts getting really cold and you get the first freeze. But really knowing the time of the year that they're hitting each individual thing and combining that together to give us more intel for the future.
And so let's combine that with behavior, because I'm out there and that's my mind is behavior. And what do I see in behavior? I don't know what we put in there last year, but they were hammering something ridiculously amount in the later after the frost freeze. And there was a bigger, longer leaf. I don't know if it was a turnip or what it was, because I'm not really up on it. I let these guys do that stuff.
Yeah.
But they would consistently come there almost, and I've talked about this before, pretty much every night. And it became a appetizer, if you will, before the main meal once it got dark. And it was consistent day after day after day. And of course, winds and different, you know, changes, all that. But so there was something there. So if you combined their palate, what they're looking for with their behaviors, and then turn these food plots aren't necessarily, you got to look at them differently. I'm going to go hunt over food because they got to go have food. No, that's not what this is at all. If you look at it differently, like I was experiencing last year, you can actually use the food source and the layout and the strategy of where and what you put in where to actually change the behavior of the deer to your advantage. It's not about they got to come to food because they're hungry. It's about what do I want to put in where, for what reason, and what time of the year is going to be the best for that. Mm-hmm. And so it's a good long strategy. We have, you know, we down by the bat line is just unbelievable. You have acorns. Okay, there's some fruit around there, but we haven't really focused a lot on that fruit, but it's there. There's plums, there's crabs, there's stuff like that. Then you walk out into the food plot, which, by the way, is screened off. So privacy, kind of that strategy for behavior for JJ, how he shot that buck with the tickling of the rack. And then later in the October or mid-October, they start getting very social. So if you have that appetizer food that they want at that time, where the frost has brought the sugars up, like Brian's talking about, and then they transition over to the hemp ropes so they can, you know, put their scents out there. And then we tried something brand new in the actual ag, which they're headed to. We created a room within the big ag cornfield. So this is food, but it's really about, I don't want to say manipulating, but using what we know about their behavior to our advantage for hunting and understanding deer.
Well, it's really building a more social atmosphere for them as a whole down there.
Down there, yeah, absolutely. Where other places, not so much, but there's a different strategy for that stand.
Right.
It might be a ridge runner or something, you know what I mean? Like hidden plots running totally different.
But I mean, it sets up great for staging areas for right before the rut. The bucks can come down, check out all the does.
Totally documented all that last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of brings it full circle with that question, you know, and asking, well, what's your favorite thing to plant? It really depends. You know, there's different strategies surrounding different things, and what to plant and where to plant it and how to hunt it. You know, there's different. There's so many variables in there that dictate, you know, what you're going to plant, when you're going to plant it, how you're going to plant it.
And then throw in your water and your wild fruit. And I'll tell you, JJ, when we started, there's a whole episode on the fruit tree thing. These were all overgrown wild fruit trees. Some of them had no apples. None of it produced. Some of it didn't produce anything. We went in there, we cleaned up and we pruned, and the amount of fruit in those areas that we took care of is amazing. I mean, I went underneath a plum tree and hit it with the roll bar on the mower, and I got just showered with plums. And they were sweet too, by the way. I had to have one, but no, that makes a big difference too. So there's that natural food there too, and water.
Yeah.
Well, I got it. Yeah, Brian, one more thing.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and when we're talking about this for the food plots, especially in the food sources, this varies so much by region. I mean, we're in southern Minnesota,
Right.
It's completely different atmosphere down in Oklahoma versus Georgia versus the Northeast. So you really got to know your area, soil compositions, what you can plant there. So there's so many, like Brian was saying, there's so many variables that can go into each one of these food plots, but getting that dialed in is really stacking the deck in your favor once you got that system figured out.
Yeah, we've been learning a lot.
Great point.
We've been learning a lot this year. We got 40 plots out there,
Yeah.
monitoring all that and cameras and all the good stuff. Last part of this one question, he was asking about the switchgrass. So we got two different kinds. We did the Cave and Rock, which we got several years of, which is it seems like it's going a little bit slower maturity than the one that we actually bought last year, which was from a guy up in Canada, Roger Sampson. Found him on Facebook and through another guy, REAP Canada is the Facebook group, but it's a variety. It was called RC Tecumseh, or I can't even pronounce it, but you'll find it if you go on that Facebook, and that's already, year one. It's a special variety. That's 5 feet tall, 6 feet tall, like the most incredible switchgrass we've seen so far. So it just blew the Cave and Rock right out of the water. Obviously more expensive, but
there's nothing wrong with the Cave and Rock either. I mean,
it's working
a really
well.
good field.
But
And
this new stuff is like next level. It's
mind blowing what happened the first year.
yeah, it's
And a lot of that was
super
through
impressive.
beans, standing beans. I mean, you were growing through other
Well,
vegetation.
that was the strategy, was to take basically a horse pasture and turn it into switchgrass. So we had to. You can talk about that at a different time, but
If you watch White House from scratch, the most recent one here, you talk about that new switchgrass in there, and there's a few looks at it. Pretty impressive
Yeah.
switchgrass stand for year one.
very impressive. Next year is going to be phenomenal. We're going to have some good access to some spots we're going to hunt. Next question, we'll roll into that, is more how important is water compared to food? So it's just kind of rolling off the same topic, coming the start of October and for the best success. So I don't know if we kind of hit on that a little bit, but
I would honestly say equally as important. For instance, my hunt last year, we never got the traffic we did on that food plot until we put in a watering hole in the corner. And that watering hole held water throughout the summer months, on the hot months, and then into the winter when they're running the ridges, trying to chase the does, they need a quick drink. There's nothing around for a quarter mile. It gives them that access and that kind of beacon or lighthouse to go to, because they know that they can replenish real quick.
And once again, you go back to, I'll comment on that. It's about behavior. Okay. You analyze the behavior of that. Well, in Minnesota here, not so much. It'd be totally different down south in some of the other states where it's very dry. Oklahoma, Texas, West Texas, all that stuff. We have so much water here, and I mean so much. So for us, it's more of a behavioral. What are we going to get them to do? That's it's just like Brian said. It's a one-stop shop. I can get a drink of water. I can eat. And so we kind of use it more like that, where in other areas, other regions, when it's dry and it's hot, water could become even more important than food in certain times of the year, I would think. And so those are things that we don't have experience with, but take what we're doing and use that to your advantage.
Well, and the other thing about it is we're kind of blessed with it up here, having the amount of moisture that we do, that the deer get a lot of their water source through the food that they're eating.
Yeah, I think, which one's more important? I don't think one's more important than the other. I think if you can use them complementary, I think that's your ticket. Give them a one-stop shop, like you said. If you can give them food, water, cover, like create a space for them where they don't have to leave, where they feel comfortable. If you can give them as many things as possible, do it. I mean, water sources for us around here, to your point, Mike, I mean, they're as much great sources of water, but you're creating these social areas. You're creating areas for them that they want to be in. And those water sources we've done podcasts on them. You know, you create those water holes, and it's like they want to drink out of those. They'll cross a perfectly good stream, you know, to go to those water holes. And one, it's a social thing. Two, I don't know, it's a mineral buildup thing. And the water, they like going to those areas, and you can put them in places where you can take advantage of them. I think that, you know, water holes are great, especially I don't want to say less work than a food plot, because they're not necessarily that, but you know, there's water holes that you can put in with not a ton of work and take advantage of them. You know, sure, it's great to rent a skid steer and dig a water hole or have some equipment to dig one. You guys have put in big tanks and kind of buried them in the ground, and you've had great success over them. So lots of different options when it comes to water holes. If you can match them with food sources, great. But even if you can't match them with a food source, I'm all for going in and putting in a water hole and kind of creating a little social area, even where you don't maybe or can't get a food plot. I think they can be really effective.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we did about a half-hour podcast with Andy on the whole water hole systems and, you know, planting them with food plots versus away from plots and size and cover and just cut. You know, we talked about a lot of that. So if you go back to a podcast we did a few months back with Andy Orr from Advanced Whitetail Systems, we covered water holes pretty in depth. I guess one summary, like the later on he talks about October in this comment. But once we get into November, that's when they start to really shine. Things dry out. You know, all your crops are super dry and plots are, you know, have less moisture. And then it just seems like those bucks running around with that big heavy coat, winter coat. Water hole is really, really strong attractant. So that's kind of my summary on that.
Brian made a good point, though, also with them crossing over clean moving streams and getting to those dingy, stagnant ponds, being that community hub. I've seen that time and time again of them just going to those small watering holes. And I think you're right. It's a mineral that they're getting naturally out of the soil that's absorbing into the water. When they drink it, they can feel that a little more than they can get that, I mean, a cold spring water, you know?
Yeah,
That's our internal debate on
Yeah.
who
Yeah,
wants to
I was
clean the
just gonna
tanks.
bring
I
in
want to
the
leave
debate.
them nasty, so we're watching them pretty close.
So there's a
but
couple things on that. I'll just bring it out in the open here. Is our tanks, we're learning on them. So one thing that we did notice is that they'll drink down that tank because it's not a big circumference. And so then if they got to get down on their knees to get to the water, if it starts getting low. So we talked about lowering the ground now that they're used to them, because we didn't want to put them just standing up. But now that they're used to them, we'll probably lower the soil, you know, where they walk in to drink a few feet, a couple feet or whatever, so that the tank, they can utilize it more. And we don't have to refill it, and they don't have to get down on their knees. So that's one thing we're going to do. The other is we notice that you get some kind of algae or black mold. I don't know what it is, build up.
Scum.
It's scum, yeah. And so we're debating that in my backyard. Once again, testing ground. I've been throwing the cattle tabs in there, and it keeps it clean. And so JJ and I are talking about that. Do you think maybe they don't like the water if it gets that particular black one in their muck? You know, because I don't know. So that's one of the debates. The other one is ponds versus tanks. We look at the horseshoe pond that you made out in Wisconsin. That thing's money. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going in there. There's cranes and bears and deer and even waterfowl, I think, landed and drank out of that. But really cool water source, really cool shape of it. Multiple animals can drink out of it at the same time, which is cool. But then again, you got the blue tongue. You know, okay, we want something stagnant and this and that and all that kind of stuff. And then is it what, blue tongue? EHD. Or EHD. And so now all of a sudden you create this breeding ground for this EHD to come into your place if you're in that weather belt. And so there's, you know, it's not cut and dry.
Yeah. Definitely risks involved with it, and you don't want that.
You do not want that.
You do not want that.
Next question. Well, Ryan asked a question, early season tactics. Do you hunt mornings, early season, sit food, sit bedding, transition areas? Love hearing other thoughts and opinions. We kind of covered a little bit of this on our last couple podcasts, but anything, and I know he's from Iowa, so, his early season would be October. It's not September like our early season, so a little bit different definition there, but so let's just talk early October, and we kind of did a little bit, but bedding, transition, morning, what are we doing now?
When the weather's still this warm, I like hunting evenings. I rarely am out in the mornings that's not saying that it's not productive. You've been getting a lot of good bucks on camera early in the morning. But as far as watching that social dynamic of the herd when they're coming out, filtering into your fields or through your transition areas, I've gotten a lot more intel in the evenings versus the mornings at this time of the year. Once it shifts into that cold, though, then it's a 50-50 ball game, and I'm just watching barometric pressure and mornings, evenings, weather patterns, and that kind of thing. So it really, I'm a evening sit guy. I mean, I haven't even sat this year yet, so I'm an evening sit guy in the early season for sure. I try not to get into bedding areas and transition areas too heavily at this time of the year, just to avoid blowing animals out of that certain area.
I think you have to take a step back and really look at it for what it is and say, okay, what does your property look like? Where's your
Exactly.
stand? Where's your stand, and how do you get in and out of it? It comes to, I'll be honest with you, right now I have a shooter buck on camera in the daylight in the morning. I won't say every morning, but 3 out of 5 mornings, probably. I'm not going to go in there and hunt in the morning because I know the spot that these bucks are. I can't get there in the morning without bumping them. I know that my chances are higher in the evening because they're off and they're bedded, and I can get in there on an edge where they're coming to a food source and get ahead of them at this point in the year. I won't say don't hunt mornings because I think mornings could be great, like that this early October timeframe, as we get frost and deer on their feet a little longer and they're hitting scrapes on their way back to bed. But I think you have to look at it and say, okay, is it realistic? Yeah, sure. If I can snap my fingers and appear in the tree stand, and be there for when the deer walks by, great. But can I get there in the dark blind without bumping the deer before they get there? And if you can say that, then I don't think it's a bad decision to hunt early. But I think a lot of cases, deer in the mornings at this point, early season, aren't on their feet in the daylight for a super long time. You might catch them for a little bit on their way back to bed, but I feel like they're on their feet. You have a better chance of them being on their feet and being set up and waiting for them to come than trying to push it and get in there when they're on their feet in those first, hours of the morning. You do more chance bumping them unless you have bulletproof access and you can get in there. So I think it all just depends on what your access is, what your property looks like.
Yeah, I think when I think about mornings, we've talked about this in other podcasts too. We're trying not to hunt the mornings and then do, what Lemke's strategy there was, hit those evenings. But I look back at, that hunt we've talked about before, Perfect Storm.
Yes.
You got to set up like that where you can park at somebody's house or a farm and just dip into a high pinch point between the big eggs. A scrape line, a trail system, logging road back in the timber, nice funnel. You got the wind in your favor. And that's a spot if we don't hunt there anymore, we kind of moved on from that piece. But I mean, it was just a phenomenal little sneak in, pop into this, basically a funnel pinch ridge system between 2 big eggs where there was a trail that they mowed for, horseback riding and trail riding and 4-wheelers and whatnot. Bucks would come through there, overhanging branches all over the place. Scrapes were just lit up. And then there was a bedding kind of like right off the knob from that. So there's just this little transition. You could just pop in there, wind in your face. Like that's just perfect morning spot right now. If they are out in the big egg still, like a frosty, really cold morning or, towards a storm system, whatever, like we pulled off there. But like this morning would have been perfect for that type of setup. That's the spot I would have definitely looked at for hunting if we still hunted there and there was a shooter and whatnot. That's killer setup. Makes me excited to hunt.
Yeah, and basically we're all saying the same thing here. The bat blind's one of those spots too. If you have the correct wind, you can get in there and you can get out of there, and a morning hunt would be just fine this time of the year. as far as going into, well, let me just say it this way. I have formed a bias throughout the years of hunting. And when I say bias, I'm not using a negative term. It's not a negative connotation. The bias is something when you experience something over and over consistently, you change your behavior to make sure that you don't have a negative experience. And so my bias is we've always hunted mostly open areas. So it was outside in, we talk about that inside out and outside in properties. This was an outside in property. So you couldn't get in the stands without blowing everything out of there, And so now I blow this deer out of there, or these deer, or this herd when it's dark out. Well, I'm done. Now the sun comes up. I'm going to sit there. And the only possible chance for me to get a deer is if I didn't bump him or if I got lucky and he happened to walk by. And we hunted that way for years and years. Now, the other scenario to that is we would hunt ridges when they were running, and we would go out in the morning. And I remember that. I was back in scent was a big thing for us. And we were like just crazy stupid because there wasn't that much technology out there at the time. And we would literally walk out there in our black underwear, long underwear. We'd have all of our clothes in our backpack or tied to us. And so we're going, you can't see a thing. We didn't want to use the lights. We didn't want to bump the deer off the beds. So we're going up there, and I just remember those days. You couldn't see nothing. You're going through these trails. You're trying not to crack a branch. But anyway, we get in there, and it would just light up running that ridge. It would just light up. We just knew that deer were going to come through there on certain days. And so I guess we're all saying the same thing. It depends on your property. It depends on your scenario and whatever your bias is. My bias is I don't like to hunt. And then the other thing is that I'm getting older and I've done so much hunting, I don't like getting up either. So that's the other bias.
I feel like if you get in those spots, if you can get in there, it can be super effective. Like
Yeah.
I can just picture like this acorn flat, and it's maybe a late morning spot, and those deer aren't getting there because they're in these big ag fields and they're getting there later.
Yeah,
and you
they're
have
just
a really
transitioning
good-
to that. Yeah.
Yeah, you have that like really good 9 o'clock movement in there, and the deer feel comfortable. And the key is getting in there. I had a couple years ago, perfect example. I had a big deer showing up late morning, and it was a big cornfield, and there was a small section of woods. Then there was a bean field on the neighbors, and the beans were still green. And it was early season, and I was getting pictures of this deer coming in there at like 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, and had a perfect set in there. And I'm like, man, I'm gonna go in there and kill this deer in the morning, early season, like it's gonna be money. And I thought I had a good way to get in there, and I remember that first morning I went in there, and it was like sirens were going off because I walked into that area, and sure, maybe the buck wasn't in there yet, but there's does in there. Like I was walking into this bedroom, and sure, it would have been great if I could have snapped my fingers and just been in the tree. But like there were so many other deer in there that deer wasn't coming in there, blew all the other deer out, so he wasn't going to come either. So it can be really good if you can get in.
Yeah, go ahead, Jay. You got something.
No, I was just going to hit on another question, which related to what you were talking about, getting in early and not using lights and whatnot. This question is going in early during gray light. Are you using a headlamp or no? White versus red. I remember back to, because I know where you're talking about up on that ridge. We had predetermined routes to get in.
We
Clean them off
cleaned them
earlier
off.
in the season. I personally liked a little red light, and I would put it in my hand and just like a little bit of crack between my fingers and just keep it real low and just kind of see what was in front of my feet, knowing that I had a trail already established and cleaned up.
Just so
I
you can
don't like-
identify
yeah.
the trail. Exactly. It's
Never
just
really
a
had-
little sliver of the red light. You covered your whole hand over it.
Yeah, never really did the headlight, bright white, blue, anything else, but that was just my preferred way to get in, and that was trying to get in really early. That was an hour before light. That spot was not good to do gray light walk in because they were
No,
basically moving the same time you were, so you better be
you better
Yeah.
be in stand.
in the stand. But yeah,
I'll add to that. So we did, for years, we would go in there, and it is dark 30. I mean, dark, dark, dark. And we get in there and we get set and we got cameras. And let me tell you something, people, that is dangerous stuff. Because I know there's multiple times where we could have been injured quite seriously. I know myself personally.
We didn't have the lifelines.
We didn't have lifelines back then. We had a portable for the cameraman, so we just had a set where he'd bring that and he'd bring it up. So, I mean, just super, super, super careful. Gosh, if you don't use lifelines, get them. Honest to God, get them. I don't know how we got away with what we got away with, but I probably shouldn't be here. I should be maimed, just all the incidents that almost happened. Anyway, so let's get away from the negative. But so we're going in there and we're trying to creep. And, I come, I'm a Marine, so I'm trying to be, Marine quiet, but I can as I get older because I weigh a little more. I'm a little more out of shape. I got all this stuff I'm carrying and you don't hear as well. You don't see as well. And so it's harder. So it was nice to be with JJ where he could kind of guide me through that. And so that's part of it. And the other one is we were bumping deer pretty much every time we went into the stand. I would say a doe or two, wouldn't you?
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes. And so if we bump that deer, some things you can do is you can offset. Okay. So you offset by going, oh, they bumped the deer and maybe we blow back at the deer. So they think it's another deer because they'll blow at each other too because if they don't know what's going on. Mm-hmm. Or we just pick up our pace like like it's a different kind of animal. It's not a person going crunch, crunch, crunch. They know that sound. Mm-hmm. The other thing is under the cover of a jet flying over or even more so, a car driving down a gravel road on a calm day, cook, get moving, because now you got sound cover. So those are some tips on that stuff. That's kind of what I picked up on. But those were some awesome, awesome days. Because like you said, Brian, them deer are out feeding and we want to get in there really early before they start to transition and do that stuff in the timber. And that's the key to it. And that's why I don't like getting up that early and going into the timber.
It's crazy. Again, I think it's we're all saying the same thing, and it's the exact same answer as some of the questions before. I look at the gray light thing and, wait until you can just barely see to get in there. And there's advantages to that. I don't do that a lot. I know that there's guys that do it in certain areas, but again, I think that you really have to pick apart, use your reveals, but really pick apart what your deer are doing and what time of year it is and where they're going, where they want to be. Is it the rut? Is it early season? Are they on feed and going to their bed? Are they rutting and chasing? Like, pick apart what your deer are doing. Make your best guess on where they're going to be at that time of the morning, right? Are they going to be in their bedroom? Are they going to be on the ag field? Now, you don't know that every day for sure, but if you really break down your property and try to understand that, then that'll give you an idea to say, okay, I need to get in there before they're in there. I need to wait and let them get to a spot where I can go in and I can see where there's a little bit of gray light. But I think it's the same thing as breaking down your property and trying to understand the best that you can what those deer are doing at that time, and then make your decision based on that.
Yeah, and my bias on gray light would be, once again, based on experience. Some of the bigger bucks and the target bucks, you see them right at that time, and it takes us so much time to get in the stand quietly because we're not just jumping up in the stand. Mm-hmm. You don't do that. You're up there. If you hear a little, you're just like, oh my God, I ruined my hunt, JJ's putting tape on these stands so that there's no creaks, no nothing. It's like ninja stuff, you know what I mean? And so you get up in that stand, it takes a long time to get set up. So if I walked in on gray light, geez, sun would be up by the time I actually cooled down and got ready.
Well, we're filming, we're setting up, multiple cameras and Tacticams in the up above us and stuff too. So there's a process, and it takes a while. You're trying to do it slow. You're taking pauses. You're listening. If you hear deer walking in, you're going to stop.
Oh, that's another thing.
That too.
If you're a self filmer, setting up your camera in the morning is time consuming too, because you don't want to drop expensive equipment 20 feet down to the ground either.
I have done that on a brand new camera, never been used before.
Yep.
Never used after that either.
That's why I mentioned, That's why there's a mention of it.
Well, with the backpack handle, it tore.
It did catch a crotch in the tree and stop halfway. So,
but it takes some time to set up in the mornings, especially if you're not using red light or
One more question, unless you want to hit Lemke.
Hammer it.
And it's a kind of a general one, so maybe we all give our own kind of description, but just says difference between a transition area and a bedding area. So maybe we should go around and see if we're all lined up or if there's something different in mind.
Mike, go ahead, kick it off.
All right. Well, bedding area is kind of a what is a bedding area? A bedding area can be a lot of different things, different times of the year. So, are bucks bedding in standing corn? Heck yes, they do a lot. And is a slough a bedding area, or is a timber ridge with knocked down a bedding area, or is a timber ridge that's wide open a bedding area? No, probably not. But yes, maybe for does. It has to do with the weather, where they bed. So there's basic core things that they do for bedding. And so just keep an open mind that you say, oh, if this is a slough, this is bedding, and this is where they're going to be all the time. That's not necessarily the case. So that's my take on that. Then as far as transition areas are going to be areas that twofold, really. One is where they don't want a bed that's open, more open timber, okay? Pinch points for sure, going from one big timber to another big timber. But once again, there's different descriptions for what is a transition area. Maybe it's the corn turning into the beans butted up to the timber. I mean, those are all transition pieces. That's the way I look at it. Mm-hmm. I don't really have a definition of what is and what isn't. So it's as much about, and contours. I mean, so I didn't answer your question. I apologize, but I just threw a lot of, information out there for you to process.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100% on that. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have deer bedding out in the middle of food plots. They're going to sleep where they're comfortable. I do agree with you in the open spaces, pine draws where there's minimal cover underneath. A lot of times they're not, until winter hits and they get those high winds and heavy snow where they want to get out of the snow, they're not utilizing those as they do south-facing hillsides where they're getting beat by sun all day, staying warm throughout the day,
And before we get too far here, let's make a definition here. You're talking about a buck, or are you talking about does? Because that's two totally different things.
That's true.
A buck's transition area and a doe's transition area, completely different. A doe's bedding area and a buck's bedding area are somewhat different as well, especially the different times of the year. They're polar opposite places.
Let's just say, well, one interesting thing that you just made me think of, both sits that I've had this year, does stand bedding in the beans, like right in the beans, both times, different spots. I've seen does bedded right there in the beans. But I think that, you guys are, in my opinion, right. I think those transition areas, especially now, there's bedding areas. That's where deer like to go and bed.
We create bedding areas.
Yeah.
We change the land for bedding. So yes, that is true.
I think but transition areas, I think transition is just a label that we use for like where deer are going between the time that they bed down and wherever they're going, whether it's a food source or whatever their destination is. Mm-hmm. That's a transition area, and we label it. But I don't know that, we can label a zone as a transition area, but I think they change throughout the year. And I think they can look a whole lot different in different scenarios. They can look different between does and bucks.
Yep.
They can look different in Minnesota versus Kansas.
Very much so.
I think it's hard to define a transition zone, but I think when you hear transition area a lot talked about in podcasts or wherever you hear it, or guys talk about it, I think it's just those areas that big bucks like to hang out. I think we use the label a lot. Big bucks hang out before they get to their destination. So an interior food plot may be an example of a staging area or transition area where, again, it's in between bedding and what their final destination is. When I think of a transition area, I think a lot of different contour, different terrain, edging. So like habitat edges are good transitional areas.
Fence lines.
Yeah, fence lines. So they're edge creatures, right? Deer are. So, good transition areas are areas of funnels or where, habitat edges exist, I think.
Side
But
cover.
the beauty of all that is, because it's such a broad thing, is that gives you the ability to create a consistency of what you want the deer to do. And I'm going to throw it to JJ on that one, because that's what we're doing at Whitetails from Scratch.
Well, I think you guys nailed a bunch of that, and it's hard to really pinpoint the definitions here, but I think he's probably thinking, he's looking at his timber and he's thinking, where's the bedding, where's the transition? Might even not be so much of like, the types of trees or the terrain. It might be related to pressure more than it is what you actually see. So if there's areas where
great
people
point.
aren't walking around, it might not be a lot of cover, but deer know that people just don't walk in there. Maybe that's the bedding area in that spot. But it's going to change across the country. I don't know where the question comes from, but on something that Lemke said there, those deer were coming or bedded in the beans. Were they just standing up throughout the night and then they'd appear, or did you see them walk in there and then bed?
The first one was I was walking in and she jumped up and
Okay.
ran into her right in the standing beans. The second one, I was in my stand. She just stood up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is going to change throughout the year then, obviously. Early season, bedding could be anywhere. Cornfield, 40-acre cornfield, could be 5 acres of that whole, just they could bed anywhere, really. Later the season gets, the more things, harvesting crops, things dry out, leaves are all dropping. I feel like the more condensed and the more like defined all that becomes, and it's easier to see, which you can see when you're hunting or scouting in the next spring. You'll really see those bedding pockets on, if it's the knobs on the timber knobs or cedar thickets or whatnot. And then, where they're going to eat. Transition, I guess, is just a broad definition anywhere in between. And that's how the Moon Guide was
Right.
explained, and really how the product worked is ABC, I don't remember which one was which, but like A, bedding, B, transition, C, food. It could be the reverse of that, but based on the red moon, you're going to hunt that ABC. Yeah, I guess it's hard to really define that.
And I don't know that I would hold that to be, the holistic truth either, because if the red moon is based on, the deer wanting to get up and move based off gravitational pull. And as far as the time of the year, I think that's where the transition, the bedding and stuff kind of comes into play. I think there was an analysis of that, but that's not going to hold purely true as this is the gospel word you need to be on that. So just keep that in mind. That's based off of trends, not off a specific what this question might be. And the other thing is time of the year is so extremely important when we're talking about these transition areas. They're going to be running ridges. They're going to be checking scrape lines. They're going to be doing all that stuff if we're talking about bucks. If we're talking about shooting a doe, get into a social transition area, which you can create yourself. That's what we're doing with the entire Wildtail property. So we create hinge cutting for bedding. We don't go in there. And to JJ's point, not only do we give them the habitat for good, safe, covered bedding, but we also 100% never step foot in that area. And it's a big area. And I was just thinking to myself, when we were doing this podcast, thinking back in the days of the ridges where the deer would run them ridges consistently all the time, I know we have those ridges out at the Whitetail from Scratch property. And not one time have we ever gone in and hunted a ridge. Never once. And you know why? Because it's not set up yet for us. But we will be having some really good ridge hunting coming in the coming years once we do timber work in there and get stuff and get our trails, systems in there. There's going to be some great ridge transition spots once we get set up. And I've been harping to do that, but it takes big machinery, it takes time, and we just haven't got to it yet.
Well, some really good questions there, a lot of good information. And again, I sum it up, sound like a broken record, but understand what your deer are doing. Understand the time of year where they're bedding and where they're going, and that's going to help you understand where those transition zones are too. Like if you understand A and C, that helps you figure out B.
And create A, B, and C if you have the ability to do that.
Absolutely. But thanks for sending your questions in and your topics. Keep doing that. We'll definitely post when we're going to do some more Q&As. Thanks for tuning in. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. If you haven't done so already, download the free Deer Society app. Hunt breakdowns are live. Some great content coming in from guys all over the country. So exciting stuff there. Make sure to keep checking that out. thanks for listening. We're going to get back, hit the tree here coming up hard now that October's here, and good luck out there hunting.
Well, I'm a deer hunting man. Well, I'm a deer hunting man.
All our sponsors here at Deer Society are partners whose equipment we know we can trust are going to make you more successful and have a better experience in the field. Products like Illusion Systems, maker of the Black Rack, the Extinguisher, and the Phase Body Odor System. Tacticam, Reveal Cell Cameras, 10-Point Crossbows, Onyx Maps, Osseo Gear, Hooyman, and Big Frig.